Is leave granted? Leave is granted.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. So, Labor does not support the Education and Employment Legislation Committee report tabled today, the Family Assistant Legislation Amendment Childcare Measures Bill No. 2, 2014. And we don't support this majority report, and the majority report focused on childcare benefit, and I'll present my reasons as to why we don't support the report. And I commend the Labor Senator's dissenting report, which gives an accurate report about the impact of freezing the income eligibility thresholds for childcare benefits. Labor believes that Australian children have a right to good quality, accessible and affordable early childhood education and care. And we further believe that children and families have a right to a quality educator. After all, many children spend longer in childcare services than their brothers and sisters do at school, and in order to retain quality educators, Labor believes in paying educators a decent professional wage. In government, Labor undertook major reforms in the early childhood education and care sector, and part of those reforms are still underway. Our reforms focused on improving educational outcomes for Australian families. The early childhood and education and care sector has overwhelmingly endorsed Labor's reforms. Labor improved staff qualifications, improved staff-to-child ratios, and introduced a national early years learning framework and a new outcomes-based accreditation system. Through the COAG process, state and territories introduced national early childhood and education laws. Labor, through its Early Years Quality Fund, took a first step in addressing the poverty wages in early childhood education and care, which left many workers well under the poverty line. The Abbott government has already abolished the Early Years Quality Fund and seems set to roll back Labor's improvements against the wishes of the sector. Despite promises before the election, all the Abbott government has done is cut $1 billion out of childcare assistance for Australian families. So we've seen cuts to family daycare. We've seen cuts to outside school hours care. We've seen the Accessibility Fund actually designed to increase childcare places, which when the government was in opposition, the now minister criticised. And in fact sat on that report from September of last year, and yet earlier this week, Tuesday I think, praised the report, which looked at how you might reduce some of the barriers that local government have in fast-tracking applications and making sure there are enough early childhood places for Australian working and studying families. But Minister Ley first criticised Labor's initiatives and then praised them. But the cuts go on. So we've seen the Indigenous Child and Family Centres in WA and across the nation severely cut, and we heard Senator Sterle speak about those earlier in the week. And of course, the most recent and the one we had the inquiry into was the childcare rebate. And Minister Lee is still singing from the Abbott government's old broken promises litany of lies song sheet with this line or lie on Tuesday, where I quote in her media release, the Abbott government is committed to making childcare more affordable, end quote. When? Not in this budget, and not with $1 billion worth of cuts. The Prime Minister's latest cut to childcare, currently before the Parliament, is a cut to the means-tested childcare benefit. It is an attack aimed directly at low and middle-income Australians, the same people who are already doing it tough and feeling the pain of the Prime Minister's harsh budget. Another attack on families, no warning before the election, and no government ever before has either moved to cut or freeze the childcare benefit. Families shouldn't have to pay the price for the Abbott government's inability to get their budget through the Parliament. Instead, Prime Minister Abbott should keep his pre-election promise and reverse the $1 million cuts to early childhood education and care that families rely on. And interestingly, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, when we did the inquiry earlier this week, we had the department there as witnesses giving us evidence. And you would think that if the government was going to make it much more difficult for families to find their out-of-pocket expenses by freezing the wage eligibility on childcare benefit, they would have some very solid research that they could present to the committee. But no, despite questions during Senate estimates and despite questions since and despite questions earlier this week at the hearing, the department, and therefore the government, has no modelling at all, other than a bit of a guess, to let the committee know and the public what the cuts will mean for families. They were able to say it's about 500,000 families that will be affected. I mean, that's a staggering amount of families who are already reeling under other budget cuts in the Abbott's harsh, cruel budget that are hitting low and middle income families. But to not be able to demonstrate the justification to the committee or to present modelling or to tell us exactly which families, when and how, which you would expect when you're taking $1 million out of a program, the government should be able to demonstrate very clearly how they arrived at that figure and what, in fact, the damage will be. But the department hasn't done any modelling. It's got no intention of doing any modelling, and it certainly didn't have any modelling to share with us earlier this week at our committee. And this is despite overwhelming evidence in other childcare inquiries and overwhelming evidence presented through submissions that the childcare benefit, which is aimed at low-income families, is really going to hurt families using childcare. And maybe I thought, well, maybe the government's got some other targeted program that it wants to put this money into. Maybe the Family and Children's Services that Senator Sterle spoke about, maybe they are going to find the $1 million needed in Western Australia to continue to support those childcare centres. But when we asked where the savings were going to go from the childcare benefit, they didn't know. They did not know. And so this measure, this childcare benefit, this freezing to the eligibility, has been around since the budget, more than 100 days, and still the department was not able to tell us where that money would go, other than to other government priorities. Well, what could be more important than supporting young children into quality early childhood in this country? And indeed, before being elected the Prime Minister of the country, that's what Tony Abbott, as the opposition leader at that point, committed to do. And what he's done ever since then is the complete opposite. Taking money from the early childhood sector is a bad move. It will impact families. We will see potentially women who work part-time having to cut their hours and therefore reducing the family's income, or we may see families being pushed into backyard, unregulated care, and that would not be in anyone's best interests. The evidence on the impact, the positive impact that early childhood education and care have on children's brain development is absolutely clear. Children benefit from quality care, and yet our Prime Minister is making that much, much tougher for Australian families, particularly those on low income. There's also plenty of evidence to say that kids from low income families also benefit from this additional support. But no, like many other budget measures, this is being ripped away from low income families. They will suffer at the hands of the Abbott government. They will be the ones that have to pay more out-of-pocket expenses for childcare that's already way too expensive, from a government that committed to do better. Well, when is the question that we ask, and I commend the Labor Senator's dissenting report, and Mr Acting Deputy President, I seek leave to continue my remarks. Thank you.